Welcome to Near and Far, the World Catholicism Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Buddy, Senior Research Scholar in the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology in Chicago. Imagine an internationally renowned theologian and scholar walking across uneven land in the African bush, overgrown, damaged by prior misuse, far from the urban centers and activity of modern Africa. The city, the place of economic vitality, the home of political power brokers, the crossroads of movers and shakers from around the world. Imagine further that this scholar is also a Catholic priest. His heart is with those left behind and made worse off by the workings of state and market in Africa, and his life's work has been about closing the gap between the imperatives of the gospel and the practices that bring life to people. The person straddling these divides is Emmanuel Katongole, a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Kampala in Uganda. He is professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame, where his role also includes being a professor of peace studies in the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies and a faculty fellow in the Kellogg Institute for International Studies. He is the author of several path-breaking books in Christian social ethics, including The Sacrifice of Africa and, more recently, Born of Lament, on the theology and politics of hope in Africa. He is also a founding director of the Center for Reconciliation at Duke University and is in demand as a speaker and preacher around the world. He is also one of the founders of the Bethany Land Institute, an innovative program seeking to address poverty, hunger, and environmental degradation. The Institute seeks to be an experiment in local food security, environmental improvement, and educational and skills development. I spoke with Father Katongole about the Bethany Land Institute, his vision for the Church, and the challenges of daring to put new ideas and approaches into practice. Welcome to Near and Far, Father Emmanuel, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. What a joy and pleasure for me to be with you and speak with you this afternoon.
Why don't you start at the beginning? What was the inspiration for the Bethany Land Institute, and how did it come into being?
Well, you know, Mike, when I was at Duke founding the Center for Reconciliation, the vision that we were working with is the vision of God reconciling all things. And that all things includes not only human beings, human society, but also the earth, the animals, the plants, creation, all things, reconciling all things. And in fact, as part of that series, we started a book series, part of that initiative, where we invited one of our professors to work on a book on reconciling God with the land, reconciliation with the land. That was Norman Woosber, working with an activist who was doing some agricultural experiment in a community. I found their vision of God reconciling with the land and our invitation to live reconciled to creation quite very persuasive, especially as it was grounded in the vision of Genesis chapter 2. So I was already thinking about this, what it means to live in reconciliation and reconciling all things and being reconciled with the land on one hand. And then on the other hand, that every year I go to Uganda once or two times and I go to visit my mother at home. And every year I realize that the forest that was near my home when I was growing up has all been cut down. And as a result, there is the land has become more arid. There's almost hardly anything to eat in the village, and the stream has dried up. And so you could see the need for water, the need for food, and the way the land looked was very, very miserable. So in 2012, when I was celebrating my 25th anniversary as a priest, I decided to do something. Instead of getting angry every time I got back home, I decided I could rechannel these efforts into the planting of a forest. So I talked to a friend of mine, Father Cornelius, whether he knew of a place that had 10 acres of land for sale, because I wanted to plant a forest. And Father Cornelius said yes, he knew such a place, and asked me why I wanted to plant a forest. So I told him. And then he said, well, you know, the people cutting down the forests are many of these young people that have flocked into the city because the whole education system promises that there is nothing good that comes out of a village, and the only way to be developed go to school, get into school system, graduate, get a job in Kampala, put on a nice suit and drive a car. But many people, of course, never make that dream. And so they stay around the city suburbs, in the slums, and the only relationship they have with the land, with the villages, which now they hate because they have been told that that is a place of backwardness, is to go back and cut down the trees, make charcoal, sell those for a bit of living. So Cornelius was saying that the whole education system needs to change. And then our other friend, Tony, came along and said, well, you guys are talking about planting a forest and education. Unless you bring in an economic dimension, all these young people that you see, they're trying to survive. They're trying to make a living. So there is poverty. Unless you also address that challenge, you may plant as many trees as you want. They're going to be cut down. So the three of us, Cornelius, Tony, and myself, began to dream of an initiative. We acquired 85 acres of land, an initiative that would bring together my concern for ecology, Cornelius's concern for education, and Tony's concern for economics, the 3 E's. So that is how it started really thinking about bringing all these challenges into one initiative.
It's fascinating. It's not usually the case that what on the outside looks like an economic or an agricultural product is explicitly theological in nature, and yours certainly is. Could you speak a little more about how Bethany reflects or contributes to sort of a Christian understanding of the created order and humanity and how the church fits in with that?
Yes, in making peace with the land, Norman Whisper makes the point that God's relationship with the land is one of love, and we are created out of the soil. So in the chapter on that story of Genesis chapter 2, it makes it obvious that God loves the land. We human beings are created out of the land, out of the earth, and that we have given a vocation, a mission to till and take care of the land. That is the second chapter of Genesis. So I found that very compelling in terms of a vision of what we are supposed to be, made out of the soil, the land, but also given the vocation to till the land. So that was the first to develop my theological sensibility of that our connection with the land is not just a mere development or agricultural project, it's a sense of connectedness and stewardship and a sense of belonging. So, and this was really even made more obvious in 2015 when I read Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical on care of common home. Because Francis there makes the point at the very beginning of this document, Laudato Si, that creation is groaning. And it's groaning because of a wound. He calls it a wound. And also he calls it a sin. And when you read, you see that the sin is our disconnect with the earth, our lack of belonging. We have forgotten, he says, what it means to belong to the earth, to be part of its soil, to breathe its air. And the result of that has been a very exploitative relationship with the land that usually kind of uses Genesis chapter 1, be masters, and subdue the earth. And so Pope Francis gets into the reading of that text and says, that's a wrong reading of what our vocation is. And again, he appeals back to Genesis chapter 2, till the earth and take care of him. Of it. So you could see immediately that theological connection again being drawn. And that sense of belonging that Pope Francis is talking about is a sense of that belonging, us belonging to the earth, but even beyond that, our sense of belonging to God and belonging to the human community, to one another. Once we lose that connection, then Pope Francis is arguing, we get into these ecological, in a way, challenges as just one dimension of that loss of belonging. And the other dimension of that is the increasing poverty that we don't care about the poor because we have lost that kind of connection. So I think that's where you see this kind of connection going on, that really at the depth of these ecological challenges or challenges of poverty, there is a wound, there is a sin. the loss of our sense of belonging to God, belonging to one another, and belonging to the earth community. And unless that is addressed, you can do all these agricultural, economic enterprises and so forth, but that wound remains unhealed. So that's what we're trying to get to, and that's the theological dimension that is at the heart of Bethany Land Institute.
Well, my understanding is that there are 3 features of the Land Institute that attempt to address these wounds in different ways. Could you speak about each of those and how they fit together?
All right, you're talking about Martha, Mary, and Lazarus.
Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, in 2011, I wrote a small book, Stories from Bethany, that was based on a research that I did in the Holy Land, which I visited because I wanted to visit this place called Bethany. I had been fascinated by the stories of Bethany, and I wanted to find out more about this place and the significance of that place in the life of Jesus. And I discovered a number of things. One, the name itself, Bethany, coming from 2 Greek words meaning house of the poor. And secondly, that it was actually a poor village next to Jerusalem. And thirdly, that this is where mostly the lepers, the unclean, the poor people lived. And very, very significantly, that this is where Jesus always lived and stayed when he came by or near Jerusalem. He never stayed within Jerusalem. Instead of, he always stayed at Bethany. This means he was always at home with the poor. I saw a number of connections between Bethany of the biblical time and Africa. So that's why I wrote that book, Stories from Bethany, to reflect on the church in Africa and our mission, if the church understands itself located within the Bethanies of this world, means, for example, the poor communities and villages in Africa. So from that point of view, I saw that Bethany was not just a name. Bethany was a metaphor, an image that really captures a sense of what it means to be at home with the poor. The word made flesh, Jesus being at home with the poor. And so I began to see that what it means for Jesus, for God to be among the poor, is to form these kind of characters like Mary, like Martha, like Lazarus. And so I began to see these as images or metaphors of what a life of incarnational connection and presence with the poor, shaped by Christian sensibility, might look like. So we use these stories to kind of shape the programs of the Bethany Land Institute. The farm, first of all, there are 3 key programs at Bethany Land Institute. There is the farm that in a way teaches the caretakers the skills of sustainable land care and food production. That farm is called Mary's Farm. Why Mary? Because it is Mary who sat down and listened. Mary, as a model disciple, sits down and listens. The farm really is not just about teaching the techniques of farming, but it's cultivating the habits of learning to listen to God, to listen to the land, and to listen to one another. So we hope that this example of Mary will also produce the same, in a way, abundance that again we read about Mary in the gospel. Mary is the same one who anointed Jesus with an alabaster jar of oil, and the whole house was filled with the fragrance, with aroma. Our hope is that this kind of attentiveness to the land will yield an abundance. What we want to create is an abundance in terms of food crops, of the flourishing of the land. That kind of almost is scandalous when you think about it in terms of what people are used to in Africa. So that's what we're trying to evoke by this image of Mary. The forest is called Lazarus. So we're going to do on the 85 acres of land, there is a forest, but we are using that as a hub for a major reforestation effort in the communities around Luwero, with the hope that by 2050 we would have planted at least 1 million trees. We call the forest and the reforestation effort Lazarus Forest or Lazarus trees because Lazarus in the stories, Bethany in the gospel, is the one who is the brother of Martha and Mary who was sick. He died, but was brought back to life. The ecology in Africa is sick, is dying. What we would like to see is a resurrection of that ecology in Africa. Not only of the social ecology, but also the environmental ecology as well. So we want to see that kind of resurrection. And our efforts at reforestation are just one dimension of that resurrection. And then the third program at Bethany Land Institute is a microfinance organization that teaches young people economic skills, saving, bookkeeping, management of finances, and that also becomes a kind of saving cooperative for them. Why Mary? Mary is the one who welcomed Jesus in her house. Imagine a woman at Jesus' time having her own house, unheard of. But that's a miracle of what happens when God dwells among us. Martha is a very productive woman. She had on her farm and so forth. So she's always busy. In the gospel, she's presented as always busy. That's the kind of lifestyle I want to create of entrepreneurship, of accountability, of stewardship, and of leadership through that program of Martha's Market. So that kind of the theological, in a way, vision, but also we are using these stories as a hook, in a way. Because they are interesting stories, I think our caretakers can easily remember them and see them as good models.
So you see local production of food, you see reforestation, and then you see making the produce of the land available to the local community. How does this, I mean, there have been so many other examples of so-called economic development across Africa. Some of those make things worse rather than better. Yours seems to have a different vision or understanding of what the goal seems to be and what steps in the right direction would be called for. It seems like there's an entirely different disposition at work here.
Well, as I said at the beginning, we found that there is some visions of modernity in a way that are responsible for creating the situation that we find ourselves in. For example, the vision that there is nothing interesting out of the village. The village is the epitome of backwardness and primitivity that has to be left behind in order to kind of get into the modern forms of economics and civilization. That has somehow created this sense of the village as a very abandoned place, and poverty has been just one dimension of that. The deforestation is another aspect. The rural neglect is just another aspect of that. So, and these visions in a way have been riding on a vision of capitalistic economic theory where development, progress is part of that. So we are trying to get away from these visions of progress, of development. What we're trying to do is to kind of live into a vision of the gospel. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And right where people are, in the communities where people are. So in a way also we are trying to make an argument that no, the village is not a desperate place. It's not a place of primitive backwardness. The village is a land of flourishing. Again, using the image of Bethany. The village is a land of deep connection. And all these traditional ways of living, of taking care of the land, actually had something significant going. So we want, in a way, to think theologically about what it means to have life to the full, but also to think in a local way. So we don't want to use the kind of the notion of development or progress, because I think they have brought us to where we are. And where we are is not a good place, especially for the majority of these young people that feel that they are discarded, they are failures, they are being pushed aside because they can't contribute to the development of a country. So that's what we're trying to, you're right, there is a counter movement that is involved in this initiative.
Well, let's talk a bit about the people who engage with the Institute. You deliberately don't call them students, but instead use the term caretakers. What do the caretakers do, and how do you see them carrying the mission of Bethany forward?
Well, Michael, first of all, we call them caretakers because, again, that term caretakers is a code name for the vision and mission of Genesis chapter 2. Till the land and keep it. Care and stewardship of the land. That is our vocation. That is our human vocation. That's what God tells us to do. To till the land and keep it and care after it. And within that promise, there is also a promise of God that I will give you everything that you need. Because if you read the story of Genesis chapter 2, then you see that the land was flourishing and all kinds of fruit trees that are medicinal and all kinds of food. So there is a kind of plentifulness that is embedded within that caretaking, within taking care of the land. So that is why we call them caretakers. How do they carry forward the vision? Here is our goal. Every year, we take in a group of caretakers. They go through a year, 2 years. We still have to determine that concretely of formation and taking care of the land and kind of imbibing the vision of Bethany Land Institute. And at the end of that time, at their graduation, if you like, we send them forth. The goal is that each one of them goes and sets up a model farm in their communities where they mentor 2-3 other young people every year. The model farm in the community becomes a point of contact, but also a kind of oasis, but also engine, if you like, for the economic development of the area. At the same time, the kind of spreading of the vision of till the land and take care of it in a way that is sustainable.
So they spread out, they carry the vision, they mentor younger people, they provide an alternative example in local communities that might pique the interest and inspire people to inquire further themselves.
That's correct. And with the other thing that I need to add in terms of doing that, and this is the notion that Pope Francis develops, the whole notion of integral development, or bring together different aspects that have not been at times brought together by these different economic development models. What Pope Francis means by this integral development is models of sustainable economics that, one, fight poverty, two, take care of creation, and three, restore human dignity. We are very, very much interested in that, especially that third aspect of restoring human dignity, a sense of human dignity, a sense of well-being, but also a sense of people regaining that dignity, especially for these young people who feel completely deflated and kind of left behind or with almost nothing to do.
You've been active in this, and this vision has seized you before Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical came out. Since that statement has been issued, are you seeing other examples or other initiatives across Africa or elsewhere that have captured some of that spirit that you've described?
Yes, and some of the examples that we are using or we are modeling after, I see dimensions of that call for integral development. One such example is this farm by this woman, Josephine Kiza, in Uganda, who owns 3.5 acres, started by her late husband and herself. They have turned these 3.5 acres in some of the most, in a way, productive pieces of land. But just kind of visiting their farm, St. Jude's farm, you can see the integrated nature of what they are doing. And her philosophy is simple. Everything is connected to everything else. And so she uses a kind of theological vision, saying God has told us to feed the land so that the land can feed you. And out of that, you can see not only the flourishing of this farm, but also the rich economic life that comes out of that, that is able to provide for her and her family, but as she's out of that, she's able also to connect with the local communities where she teaches local women these sustainable means of create land care. So we see that as an example, and this started long before Laudato Si. So, but I think when you read Laudato Si, you say, oh, it's something like this that Pope Francis is calling for. We see that in another initiative in Benin, spearheaded by this Dominican priest, Father Godfrey Nzamujo, called at the Songhai Center, who is training young people really to take care of the land in this, again, sustainable way. Again, based on the same theology, everything is connected. Nothing goes to waste. And so his goal is say, well, Africa is not a hopeless place. And that's where he uses the name Songhai to evoke the old kingdom of Songhai that we are very exemplary in the 14th and 15th century that built these big cities like Timbuktu, and say there is something within the local African spirit and history that evokes that sense of flourishing. So let's not resign ourselves to the sense that Africa is a backward, hopeless continent. No, right here within our midst, we can, in a way, generate that sense of flourishing. We can unleash the internal capacities of individuals, of young people, that help them not only to take care of the land, creation, but also in doing so, kind of engage in very productive economic activities that lead to their flourishing and sense of dignity. I'm seeing more and more of such initiative experiment. They may not directly invoke Laudato Si, but I think it is this kind of experiments of integral ecology that Pope Francis has in mind by calling for initiatives that fight poverty, restore creation, care for creation, and also advance human dignity on the ground.
As you look forward, what are some of the largest challenges that you see in implementing the vision of the Institute? What kind of problems have you encountered that have been more difficult than you expected? I mean, it's such an ambitious undertaking that I'm sure it couldn't have been easy to get it to this point.
Yeah, well, now and again, Mike, I wake myself and say, what did I get myself into? I know being a professor is a difficult thing, and writing books and teaching and things like that. But anyway, there is a certain kind of predictability around that, and a certain comfort at a given level. You know what is expected in terms of your teaching of the classes, and you are writing a paper, and you are delivering a public presentation. My work with the Bethany Land Institute has brought me to a whole new place where almost everything is new. I have to learn new skills, skills that are very different from thinking ideas and writing papers and teaching classes. It involves not only learning to work with the people in the village communities, young people, uneducated people. Involves working with and around the stubborn, inefficient, but highly bureaucratic systems of government. Setting up a bank account, for example, took me 4 months to set up
4 months for a bank account.
a bank account, an organization bank account. It's one document after another that is required. Setting up these different boards in Uganda, one in Uganda and one here, non-profit here, running boards and board meetings. This is a completely different set of skills I have had to learn, and I'm still learning. So the greatest, I think, one greatest challenge that I've encountered is a sense of time. First of all, my own time, but the sense of time that everything takes in undertaking an initiative like this to get it off the ground.
Everything takes longer than one expects.
Everything takes much longer than one can be envisaged, especially when you are envisaging it from a place like Notre Dame and so forth. Everything takes much longer. And the other thing is that the vision is coherent, I think. The vision is clear. But as Pope Francis reminds us, realities are more important than ideas. every time I am in Uganda and I'm working, and so, I feel a sense of, oh, everything is broken. Everything, all the efforts that we do are too little, insufficient. So there is a certain kind of sense that, oh my goodness, the vision is much bigger, but everything seems so small, so tiny, so unbroken, so insufficient. So how to overcome that sense of, oh, this can't be done, or it's too small. I have found myself drawing back and back on the image of Oscar Romero. We are only called to plant seeds. Uh, we are not master builders. We are servants. So kind of to do the little that can be done, the small steps along the way. We have also had some disputes on the land, but we're in the process of finalizing that. But this is just kind of also to show that it takes time and takes energy, much more time and energy than than I thought at the beginning. Yeah, but it is very exciting. It's very exciting. And the other thing that kind of keeps me going is that it is needed. Every person I talk to and share the vision, I say, well, Emmanuel, this is needed, especially for such a time as this. And also the sense of encouragement that, well, I don't know a better person to lead this initiative than yourself, Emmanuel. So I kind of feel encouraged by that sense of this is needful, and this seems to be a step in the right direction.
Well, for persons who are captivated by the vision of the Institute and who understand the way that the parts weave in together and plant those seeds of hope that you mentioned, those who want to support you or this particular initiative, what should they do? How do they get in touch?
Well, before we get to that, Michael, first of all, I want to say that I have been amazed by the number of people who find this compelling, and they want to be part of that. And part of it that is reflected in some of the initial funding that we have received from different organizations, churches, and individuals. So I'm beginning to think about this. It's just not just a question of a project. I'm beginning to think more and more about it as almost a kind of a movement. There's a kind of a movement. There's a kind of a train. So I'm inviting people who find this compelling to join us in this movement. You can visit our website and see what we're doing. We're in the process of revamping our website. You can let me know. Send me an email. I'm always very happy to respond to that email. And most importantly, I'd like to invite you to come and see. Come visit us. We can organize a trip, and then I can see, and then we can get ways to how to connect. There is a non-profit organization here, Bethany Land Institute USA, that helps me with that kind of connection and mobilizing partnerships and the friends around the US. So we'd like to see more and more people, organizations, universities, institutions, and others kind of join us on this journey.
Well, it sounds like you have much more than a simple project on your hands. You're launching a revolution of sorts. So congratulations to you for that. And thank you for joining us. And we will look forward to updates on the Institute and your many other activities in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. This has been a delight talking to you.
Thank you so much. Near and Far is produced by the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, a research institute focused on Catholicism around the world with special attention to the Church in the so-called Global South. The center is sponsored by DePaul University, a Catholic university in the Vincentian tradition in Chicago. Production assistance for Near and Far comes from Greg Barker, Anna Gallen, Francis Salino, and Karen Kraft. For more information on the center and its activities, look for the Center for World Catholicism on the web, Facebook, or Twitter.